431 BCE. Greece is on the brink of total collapse. Two superpowers, Athens and Sparta, prepare to clash in a war that will last decades, shatter empires, and rewrite the rules of survival. Cities will fall, heroes will die, and no one, not even the strongest, will be safe. This is the story of ambition, betrayal, and a war where endurance is the only weapon. But will it be enough? 431 BCE, early spring. At the exact moment when the first Spartan king steps across the Athenian frontier, every known rule of Greek warfare says this city should already be dead. Athens is surrounded by enemies, hated by allies, and vastly outmatched on land. Its farms lie exposed, its countryside cannot be defended. Its walls enclose a population that cannot feed itself. By logic alone, Athens should submit, evacuate, or be annihilated. And yet it does none of these. Instead, Athens makes a decision so unnatural, so defiant of precedent, that even its enemies hesitate. It refuses to fight the war everyone expects. It chooses endurance over honor, survival over glory, and calculation over courage. It chooses a path that will slowly poison Greece itself. History insists this war should have been short. It will last 27 years. To understand how the Greek world reached this moment, one must return 50 years earlier, to the ruins left behind by Persia's failed invasion. In 479 BCE, the fires of Plataea and Mycale had barely cooled. The great king's armies had been shattered, his fleets broken, his myth of invincibility reduced to ash. Greece had survived, but survival came at a cost. Victory did not unite the Hellenic world. It exposed it. Sparta emerged from the Persian wars as the unquestioned master of land warfare. Disciplined, conservative, feared. Its power rested on tradition, on obedience, on an economy built atop enslaved helots, whose labor fed a permanent warrior caste. Sparta wanted the world frozen in place. No expansion, no innovation, no risks. Athens emerged transformed. Once unstable, divided and vulnerable, Athens had discovered something more dangerous than the spear, the fleet. Hundreds of triremes, tens of thousands of rowers, a weapon not bound by geography. Where Sparta controlled fields and passes, Athens controlled movement itself, and Athens did not intend to let go. In 478 BCE, Athens positioned itself as protector of the Aegean. The Delian League was formed on paper a defensive alliance, in practice an instrument of Athenian power. Tribute flowed, fleets expanded. Garrisons appeared. Cities that resisted were punished. Cities that complied found themselves trapped. What had begun as leadership hardened into domination. Sparta watched silently. For years, Spartan anxiety grew but remained contained. The Peloponnese was stable, its allies obedient. Athens was distant, dangerous but not yet intolerable. But power has a way of announcing itself, and Athens announced it in stone. The long walls, two massive fortifications stretching from the city to the sea, turning Athens into an island on land. With these walls completed, Athens could survive indefinitely, supplied by its fleet, even while enemies ravaged its fields. By every known rule of Greek warfare, this was heresy. Cities fought to defend their land. To abandon it was disgrace. To hide behind walls while enemies burned farms was unthinkable. The long walls signaled something far worse than arrogance. They signaled permanence. Sparta now faced an enemy it could not easily threaten, intimidate, or destroy. A city immune to siege, a navy Sparta could not match, an empire growing richer with every passing year. Fear settled into Spartan councils. Alliances hardened. The Peloponnesian League closed ranks. Athens tightened its grip on the Aegean. Minor disputes escalated into crises. Neutral cities were forced to choose sides. Every local conflict now carried the weight of catastrophe, and yet war did not come immediately, because both sides knew the truth. If this war began, it would not be fought like any before it. By 432 BCE, the balance collapsed. Athenian economic sanctions strangled Megara, a Spartan ally. Corinth, rich, proud and furious, pressed Sparta toward action. The credibility of Spartan leadership was now at stake. If Sparta did nothing, its allies would fracture. If it acted, the cost would be unimaginable. Sparta voted for war, not because victory was certain, but because delay was fatal. When Spartan armies finally crossed into Attica in 431 BCE, they came with overwhelming confidence. They marched as Greeks always had, to devastate the enemy's land, force battle, break morale, and end the conflict quickly. What they found instead was silence. Athens did not come out to fight. Its fields burned, its villages emptied. Smoke rose across Attica, while tens of thousands of refugees crowded behind the walls. Disease spread, supplies tightened, families watched their livelihoods vanish in real time. Inside the city, pressure mounted. This was unbearable. No rational commander would tolerate this humiliation. No democracy could endure it. But Pericles, the architect of this strategy, did not bend. He understood something his enemies did not. Sparta could win every battle and still lose the war. As long as Athens lived, its fleet could strike anywhere. As long as its walls stood, Sparta could not force decision. Time itself became Athens' weapon, and time would bleed Greece dry. The first year ended with no decisive clash, no glorious victory, no heroic resolution, only exhaustion, bitterness, and a realization spreading through every city-state in Hellas. This war would not be about courage. It would be about endurance, and endurance has a cost no city can calculate in advance. As the Spartans withdrew and Athens prepared for another year behind its walls, something unseen began to stir within the city itself, something far deadlier than any hoplite army. Because while Athens believed it had outwitted Sparta, the war had only just begun. 430 BCE, summer, inside the walls of Athens. What no Spartan spear could accomplish, no siege engine could achieve, no invasion could force, begins without warning, without banners, without mercy. The plague enters Athens silently. It does not arrive as an army. It comes as breath, as water, as proximity. It slips through the very walls meant to guarantee survival. By every known rule of warfare, the city has done everything correctly. It has avoided battle. It has preserved its fleet. It has denied the enemy victory. And yet, now, logic collapses. Bodies begin appearing in the streets. At first, the symptoms confuse even experienced physicians. Fever so intense it feels like fire beneath the skin. Throats burning, eyes inflamed, tongues cracked with thirst. Victims tear off their clothes and plunge into cisterns, desperate to cool a heat that does not respond to water. Many die within days. Some linger, hollowed out, delirious, forgotten, the sick pile atop the sick. Athens was never meant to hold this many people. The countryside had been emptied into the city for safety, and now that safety becomes a weapon against itself. Families share cramped spaces, refugees sleep in temples, air grows thick with decay. The dead are no longer buried with rites. They are stacked by every known measure of human endurance. Athens should break here. Instead, it endures, fractured, panicked, and slowly unrecognizable. Thucydides himself contracts the disease and survives, leaving behind an account so clinical it strips the horror bare. He describes not heroism, but collapse, lawlessness, religious despair, the abandonment of restraint. When death becomes random, morality feels pointless. Why honor the gods if they do not protect you? Why obey laws if tomorrow is not guaranteed? This is not merely a biological catastrophe. It is psychological warfare without an enemy commander, and Sparta watches from a distance. When news reaches the Peloponnese, Spartan armies hesitate. Fear spreads. Even hardened warriors refuse to linger near a city rumored to be cursed. The invasion is cut short. Attica is spared further devastation, not by Athenian arms, but by terror of contamination. By every known rule of strategy, this should be a reprieve. It is not. Inside the city, anger turns inward. Pericles, once untouchable, now faces fury. He had asked Athens to sacrifice land, comfort, honor. He promised survival through patience. Now citizens bury children and parents without ceremony. They demand answers. They demand action. They demand blood. Pericles is fined, removed from command, briefly disgraced. Yet even in this moment of humiliation, history hesitates. Because Athens has no alternative. No general offers a better plan. No faction can propose a decisive strike. The walls remain. The fleet still exists. The enemy still cannot be crushed outright. And then, in the midst of catastrophe, Athens makes the most dangerous decision a democracy can make. It returns Pericles to power, because desperation breeds faith in the familiar. Shortly after, Pericles dies, not in battle, not in triumph, but slowly, weakened, consumed by the same plague that has torn the city apart. With him dies strategic coherence. What follows is not a change in policy, but a fragmentation of will. Athens does not abandon its grand strategy. It abandons restraint. Ambition, once disciplined, now roams unchecked. The plague eventually recedes, but it leaves behind a city permanently altered. Perhaps a quarter of the population is gone. Veterans, sailors, citizens, leaders, the institutions remain, but the people who gave them weight are missing. Sparta senses weakness, yet it still cannot deliver a killing blow. The war drags on, shifting shape. Raids replace invasions. Naval skirmishes erupt across the Aegean. Allies on both sides waver. Rebel, defect. Every city becomes a potential flashpoint. In 425 BCE, something unthinkable happens. A Spartan army is trapped and forced to surrender on the island of Sphacteria. Spartan soldiers, elite hoplites, lay down their arms. For generations, Spartans had been taught that surrender was worse than death. This single event sends shockwaves through Greece. The myth of Spartan invincibility cracks. Athens celebrates. Confidence surges. The belief takes hold that Sparta can be beaten outright. By every known rule of restraint, this is the moment to negotiate. Athens does not. Victory intoxicates the wounded city. Demagogues rise, promising total domination. Cleon emerges as a voice of aggression, feeding popular anger into expansion. Where Pericles sought to outlast Sparta, his successors seek to humiliate it. Sparta sues for peace. Athens refuses. The war enters its most dangerous phase, not because of enemy strength, but because Athens believes it can no longer lose. History insists this is where empires begin to rot, because power untempered by fear becomes reckless. As the conflict grinds forward, the battlefield expands, the rules loosen. Brutality increases. Cities are no longer merely defeated, they are erased. Populations are enslaved or executed. Neutrality becomes impossible. Athens, once defender of Greek freedom, now begins to resemble the very empire it once claimed to oppose. And somewhere beyond the horizon, watching carefully, lies a force that has waited patiently for Greek unity to collapse again. Because the Peloponnesian War is no longer just a struggle between Athens and Sparta. It is a slow-motion implosion of the Greek world itself, and the worst decision of all has not yet been made. By every known rule of war, this should be the end. 10 years of bloodshed have drained both sides. Sparta has lost men it cannot easily replace. Athens has lost citizens, confidence and the discipline that once restrained its ambition. The Greek world is exhausted. Fields lie fallow. Treasuries are thin. Graves are full. Logic demands peace. And so, on parchment and oath, peace is declared. But this is not peace. It is paralysis disguised as resolution. Neither side believes the war is truly over. Neither side trusts the other. Allies refuse to comply. cities refuse to forget their grievances. What is signed in 421 BCE is not an ending. It is a pause, unstable and deceptive, in which resentment quietly reorganizes itself. Athens, in particular, does not behave like a city at rest. Inside its walls, something fundamental has shifted. The plague did not just kill bodies, it stripped away caution. A generation of leaders who remembered vulnerability is gone. In their place rise men who know only empire, who equate restraint with weakness, and who see negotiation as surrender by another name. Into this vacuum steps Alcibiades, young, brilliant, aristocratic, reckless. He is everything. Pericles was not, and everything Athens increasingly wants. Where Pericles spoke of limits, Alcibiades speaks of destiny. Where Pericles warned against overreach, Alcibiades promises expansion without consequence. By every known rule of political stability, this is a dangerous moment. Alcibiades despises the peace of Nicias. He undermines it openly, humiliating Spartan envoys, manipulating alliances, and dragging Athens into new entanglements. Argos is courted, Mantinea is armed, old balances collapse. Sparta, humiliated diplomatically, is forced back toward war despite having sought peace. The battlefield shifts inland. In 418 BCE, at Mantinea, Sparta delivers a brutal reminder of its power. Hoplites clash in one of the largest land battles of the war. Spartan discipline holds. Their enemies break. The victory restores Spartan confidence, but it does not end the instability. Because Athens does not learn caution from defeat, it learns resentment. The democracy grows restless. The empire feels heavy. Tribute flows in, but so do rebellions. The fleet remains powerful, yet it is always in motion, always required, always stretched. Athens is winning no decisive blow, but it is losing time. Then comes the proposal that should never have been spoken aloud. Sicily, far to the west, beyond the familiar rhythms of Aegean warfare, lies Syracuse, rich, powerful and independent. An Athenian ally appeals for help. The opportunity is framed as limited, manageable, profitable, but beneath the rhetoric lies something darker. If Athens can conquer Sicily, it will control grain routes, manpower, and wealth on a scale no Greek city has ever possessed. It will become unstoppable. Sparta will be irrelevant. Resistance will collapse under the sheer weight of Athenian reach. By every known rule of logistics, geography and command, this is madness. The distance alone is immense, the enemy unknown, supply lines fragile. No rational commander would risk the empire's survival on a campaign so far removed from home. And yet, the assembly votes yes, not narrowly, enthusiastically, because Alcibiades promises inevitability. He paints the expedition as destiny itself. He assures the people that hesitation is more dangerous than action, that Athens must expand or suffocate. That greatness is not maintained, it is seized. Opposition exists. Nicias, the architect of peace, speaks against the plan. He warns of scale, cost, uncertainty. He attempts to frighten the assembly by exaggerating the resources required. It backfires. The people do not retreat. They double down. They vote for even more ships, more men, more ambition. History insists this should have been the moment reason intervened. Instead, Athens commits the largest force it has ever sent abroad. In 415 BCE, the armada departs. Triremes stretch across the horizon. Soldiers crowd the decks. Citizens gather at the harbor in awe. It looks like victory already, like destiny made visible, like an empire fulfilling its promise. But beneath the spectacle, fractures are already forming. On the eve of departure, religious statues across Athens are mutilated. Panic spreads. The act is sacrilege, treason, or both. Accusations fly. Alcibiades is implicated. The fleet sails anyway. Shortly after, Alcibiades is recalled to stand trial. He does not return. He defects to Sparta. By every known rule of loyalty and self-preservation, this is betrayal beyond measure. Alcibiades delivers Athens' intentions, strategies and vulnerabilities directly into the hands of its enemy. Sparta now knows where Athens will strike, and how. The Sicilian expedition arrives without its architect. Led instead by commanders divided in temperament and vision, Nicias hesitates. Others push forward recklessly. The enemy regroups. Time passes. Momentum fades. Sparta sends help. A Spartan commander, Gylippus, reaches Syracuse and turns the tide. Fortifications rise. Naval tactics adapt. The Athenians find themselves trapped far from home, fighting an enemy who now understands them intimately. What was meant to be a swift demonstration of power becomes a grinding nightmare. Supplies thin, disease spreads, morale erodes. By every known rule of warfare, this expedition should retreat. It does not, because Athens has invested too much pride to withdraw, and so, step by step, the city walks deeper into catastrophe. As the noose tightens around the Athenian army in Sicily, Sparta prepares to strike closer to home, guided by the very man Athens once trusted to lead it to glory. The war, once balanced, now tilts decisively, and Athens does not yet realize that it has already lost. 413 BCE, outside Syracuse, before dawn. By every known rule of war, the Athenian army should no longer exist. What began as the grandest expedition ever launched by a Greek city has been reduced to a trapped mass of exhausted men, hemmed in by walls they failed to breach, and seas they no longer control. The land is hostile, the harbor is sealed. Reinforcements have turned into liabilities. Hope has thinned into habit. Athens is not fighting for victory anymore. It is fighting to escape. Inside the Athenian camp, starvation has become routine. Horses collapse from hunger. Rowers, once the engine of empire, are too weak to lift oars. Disease spreads again, fed by stagnant water and decomposing bodies. Commanders argue while soldiers listen in silence, knowing arguments cannot change geography. Nicias still hesitates. He waits for omens. He consults priests. He fears the consequences of retreat as much as annihilation. In this paralysis, the Syracusans tighten their grip. Spartan advisors press the attack. Naval engagements that Athens once dominated now end in chaos and defeat. Then the sea closes. The great harbor becomes a killing ground. Athenian ships collide, entangle, capsize. The water fills with debris, blood, and screaming men pulled under by armor. On shore, soldiers watch the battle as if witnessing their own execution, knowing the outcome will decide their fate. Athens loses the harbor. By every known rule of survival, the army must now flee overland. At last, Nicias gives the order. The retreat begins. 40,000 men move as one through hostile terrain, burdened by the wounded, stalked by enemies, stripped of cohesion. The Syracusans harass them constantly, cutting off water, blocking passes, striking from elevation. Discipline dissolves. Groups splinter. Officers lose control. The march becomes a series of desperate sprints between disasters. Those who fall behind are captured or killed. Those who stop are finished. At the Acinarus River, desperation peaks. The Athenians reach water and break formation, rushing forward in a frenzy. The enemy attacks from above, turning the river into a slaughterhouse. Men drink and die simultaneously. Bodies clog the stream. Blood mixes with mud. This is not a battle. It is an execution. Nicias and Demosthenes surrender separately, each hoping to spare their men. It changes nothing. The survivors are herded into stone quarries, sunken pits without shelter, food, or sanitation. Thousands die slowly. Others are sold into slavery. Only a few ever return home. Athens has lost an entire generation. The news reaches Greece like a shockwave. Athenian power, once assumed unstoppable, is revealed as fragile. The empire has bled itself in full view of its enemies. Allies revolt. Tribute falters. Confidence collapses. Sparta seizes the moment. Guided by Alcibiades, Spartan forces fortify Deceleia in Attica, permanently occupying Athenian territory for the first time. Slaves flee, silver mines shut down, supply lines fracture. Athens is now under constant pressure, not seasonal invasion. Worse still, Sparta secures Persian support. The old enemy returns, not with armies but with gold. Persian money funds Spartan fleets. The balance at sea begins to shift. Athens no longer has naval supremacy by default. Every trireme lost now matters. Inside Athens, panic breeds radicalism. The democracy fractures. In 411 BCE, an oligarchic coup briefly replaces it, promising stability and survival. It delivers neither. Internal mistrust spreads. Loyalty erodes. The city survives, but only barely, held together by habit and fear. Alcibiades returns again. Once a traitor, now a savior. He wins naval victories, restores confidence, and briefly makes Athens believe reversal is possible. For a moment, history seems to hesitate. The empire is wounded, but not dead. But Athens has learned nothing. Arrogance resurfaces too quickly. Commanders grow careless. Political vendettas override strategy. In 406 BCE, Athens wins a naval victory at Arginae, then executes its own generals for failing to recover the dead. By every known rule of survival, this is madness. Sparta, meanwhile, finds its instrument, Lysander, cold, patient, politically adept. Unlike previous Spartan commanders, Lysander understands empire. He cultivates Persian alliances, builds loyalty among allies, and waits for Athens to make one final mistake. In 405 BCE, at Aegospotami, that mistake arrives. The Athenian fleet is caught unprepared. Ships are captured almost without resistance. Crews are slaughtered. In a single stroke, Athens loses its navy. The war is over. Athens does not fall in battle. It starves. In 404 BCE, the long walls are torn down. The fleet is surrendered. The empire is dismantled. Democracy is abolished. The city that once defied logic now submits to it. By every known rule of history, this should be the end of Athens' significance. And yet, the consequences of its rise and fall will echo far beyond its defeat, because Greece, victorious or not, has destroyed itself. And in the vacuum left behind, new powers will rise. 404 BCE. Athens. Winter. The city does not fall in fire. It falls in silence. Grain ships stop arriving. The harbors empty. Inside the long walls, hunger tightens with mathematical certainty. Each day without food reduces resistance. Each night without hope weakens resolve. By every known rule of siege warfare, Athens has reached the final stage, not collapse, submission. When the gates finally open, there is no dramatic last stand, no charge, no rally. The Athenians are too weak even for despair. Lysander's fleet waits offshore, untouched, absolute. Spartan envoys enter a city that once commanded the seas and find a population reduced to shadows. The terms are brutal and precise. The long walls must be destroyed. The fleet must be surrendered. All but a handful of ships. The empire must be dissolved. Athens must follow Spartan leadership in foreign policy. And the democracy, Athens' most dangerous invention, must be dismantled. By every known rule of power politics, this is total defeat. The walls come down to the sound of flutes, not celebration but mockery. Each stone removed is a reminder that endurance has limits. The city that once defied logic has been reduced to obedience. Sparta installs the 30 tyrants. They are Athenians, not Spartans, and that is deliberate. Rule imposed from within is more efficient than occupation. The 30 govern through terror. Executions are swift. Property is seized. Old political enemies disappear overnight. Thousands flee the city. Thousands more die. Athens, once loud with debate, becomes quiet, yet even now Sparta miscalculates, because Sparta knows how to dominate land, but not how to manage victory. The Peloponnesian War has ended, but the damage it inflicted cannot be undone. Greece is exhausted, fractured and bitter. The old norms of restraint are gone. Massacres, betrayals, and shifting loyalties have become acceptable tools of policy. The war has taught every city the same lesson. Mercy is optional. Power is temporary. Survival is everything. Within a year, the 30 are overthrown. Democracy returns, weakened but alive. Sparta allows it, not out of generosity but exhaustion. The victor is already losing control of the world it has shattered. Sparta now stands where Athens once stood, dominant, feared and overstretched. Its allies grow resentful. Its rigid system proves ill-suited to empire. Its population is too small to enforce permanent dominance. Its economy lacks flexibility. The very conservatism that once made Sparta strong now makes it brittle. Former allies turn hostile. Persia manipulates Greek politics with gold and patience. Sparta wins battles but loses influence. By the early 4th century BCE, Greece enters a new cycle of wars, shorter, sharper, and more ruthless. Corinthian War, Spartan decline, the rise of Thebes, the destruction of Spartan armies, once thought invincible. The Peloponnesian War did not end Greek conflict. It normalized it. It taught Greek cities that annihilation was possible and survivable, that cities could be erased, populations enslaved, and still the world would continue. The moral limits of warfare had been permanently lowered. Athens never regains its empire, but it does not disappear. Its walls are rebuilt, its harbor revives, its thinkers write, its veterans teach, its trauma becomes memory, then philosophy. Thucydides finishes his history not as a celebration but as a warning. He writes not of heroes but of fear, miscalculation, and inevitability. Because the Peloponnesian War was never about Athens versus Sparta alone, it was about what happens when power believes itself rational. Athens believed intelligence could replace restraint. Sparta believed tradition could replace adaptation. Both were wrong, and the Greek world paid the price. The true victor of the war is not Sparta. It is instability. Decades later, a new power will look south and see a land of divided cities, exhausted armies, and endless grudges. Macedonia will rise not because it is stronger than classical Greece, but because Greece has already destroyed itself. Philip will exploit the fractures. Alexander will inherit the consequences. The Peloponnesian War clears the path. It proves that brilliance does not guarantee survival, that democracy can be reckless, that discipline can be inflexible, that logic can justify catastrophe. By every known rule of history, Greece should have learned from this war. Instead, it carries its lessons forward, sharpened, refined, and deadlier. The war ends in 404 BCE. Its consequences never do. 403 BCE. Athens before dawn. The democracy is restored quietly, almost cautiously, as if the city itself is unsure whether it deserves to speak again. There are no parades, no proclamations of triumph. The men who return power to the assembly do so with scars still visible on their wrists and memories still fresh of friends executed without trial. Amnesty is declared not because Athens has forgiven, but because it cannot survive another purge. By every known rule of recovery, this city should now retreat inward and heal. It does not. Athens survives, but Greece does not stabilize. The Peloponnesian War has shattered the old order so completely that no city knows how to behave in peace. The war taught every state that hesitation invites destruction and restraint invites exploitation. Trust is gone, memory is poisoned. Sparta, now the dominant power, attempts to rule Greece the way it ruled itself, through obedience, fear, and imposed order. Spartan harmosts are installed in cities across the Aegean. Garrisons replace autonomy. Allies become subjects. This is where Sparta commits the same sin Athens once did. It mistakes victory for legitimacy. Sparta has never governed an empire before. Its citizens are trained to command helots, not manage diplomacy. Its kings understand battlefields, not economies. Its system depends on stability at home, yet empire demands constant attention abroad. The contradiction begins to tear it apart. Former allies rebel almost immediately. Corinth resents Spartan interference. Thebes chafes under occupation. Athens, though weakened, refuses to disappear. Persia watches all of it carefully. By 395 BCE, the Greek world is at war again. The Corinthian War erupts not from ambition, but from exhaustion. Athens, Thebes, Corinth and Argos align against Sparta, funded quietly by Persian gold. The irony is complete. Greeks now fight Greeks with Persian money to weaken a Greek hegemon that once claimed to defend Hellas. Battles rage across land and sea. Sparta wins tactically and loses strategically. Its armies march, fight and withdraw, leaving behind anger rather than obedience. Its fleet collapses when Persian funding shifts. Its authority erodes with every campaign. Athens regains something it lost: confidence. Its walls are rebuilt with Persian approval. Its fleet returns to the sea, not as an empire, not as a liberator, but as a survivor that has learned how fragile power truly is. Athens does not challenge Sparta directly, it waits. In 387 BCE, the king's peace is imposed. Persia dictates the terms. Greek autonomy is proclaimed, while Persian authority is enforced. Sparta is named the enforcer, turning it into a tool of foreign will. The victory tastes hollow. Greece is no longer master of its own fate. By every known rule of independence, this should provoke unity. It does not, because the Peloponnesian War has burned cooperation out of Greek politics. Cities no longer believe in collective survival. They believe only in delaying their own destruction. Sparta's decline accelerates. Its population shrinks. Its rigid system cannot absorb losses. Its enemies adapt. Its myth fades. In 371 BCE, at Leuctra, the impossible happens. A Spartan army is destroyed, not defeated, destroyed. The Theban general Epaminondas shatters the Spartan phalanx with innovation and precision. Spartan citizens die in numbers they cannot replace. The psychological impact is catastrophic. By every known rule of Greek history, Sparta should not recover. It does not. Thebes rises briefly, aggressively, reshaping Greece through force and reform. Helots are freed. Spartan territory is invaded. The old balance is gone forever. Yet Thebes cannot hold what it wins. Because Greece is no longer capable of sustained leadership. Each city that rises does so over ruins left by the last. Each victory shortens the lifespan of the victor. The Peloponnesian War has not ended conflict. It has compressed it. Wars come faster. Decisions become harsher. Mercy disappears entirely. And in the north, Macedonia watches. It is not Greek by tradition, not fully barbarian by Greek standards. It has been dismissed for generations as peripheral, irrelevant, uncivilized. That dismissal will prove fatal. Philip of Macedon grows up watching Greek warfare from the margins. He studies it. He internalizes its failures. He understands what Greece no longer does, that unity enforced is stronger than unity negotiated. By the time Greece notices Macedonia, it is too late. Athens debates, Thebes hesitates, Sparta cannot act. At Charonea, in 338 BCE, Greek independence effectively ends. The city-states fight bravely, but not together. Old rivalries override necessity. Coordination fails. Macedonian discipline prevails. The Peloponnesian War has reached its final consequence. Not in Athens, not in Sparta, but in the silence of cities that can no longer defend themselves. What began in 431 BCE as a struggle between two powers ends nearly a century later with the collapse of an entire system. The war did not kill Greece outright. It weakened it just enough for someone else to finish the task. And yet, even in defeat, Greece leaves something behind. Ideas forged in trauma, histories written in bitterness, philosophies born from witnessing collapse. Democracy, flawed and dangerous, survives long enough to be remembered. The Peloponnesian War proves that greatness is not destroyed by enemies alone. It is dismantled by fear, pride, and the refusal to stop. History insists this war ended in 404 BCE. Reality says it never truly ended at all. 338 BCE. Charoneia. Late afternoon. The dust hangs motionless over the battlefield, as if even the air is waiting to see whether Greece will survive itself. Athens and Thebes stand together for the first time in generations. Old enemies, old wounds, old distrust, forced into cooperation by necessity rather than belief. By every known rule of Greek politics, this alliance should not exist, and by every known rule of warfare, it has formed far too late. Across the field waits Philip of Macedon. His army does not look like a Greek army. The phalanx is deeper, heavier, bristling with sarissas that stretch forward like a moving forest. Cavalry stands disciplined and patient, not ceremonial. Officers move with practiced coordination. This is not a coalition of cities. It is a state at war. The Greeks still fight as cities. Athens holds the left. Thebes anchors the right with its sacred band. Elite warriors bound by oath and reputation. Courage is not lacking. Skill is not absent. What is missing is unity of command, shared doctrine, and trust born from decades of cooperation. The battle begins conventionally. Then Philip retreats. Slowly, deliberately, the Athenian line advances, believing the Macedonians are breaking. Shouts rise, formation stretches, discipline thins. By every known rule of battlefield psychology, this is the moment when confidence becomes vulnerability. Philip turns. The Macedonian line surges forward with terrifying precision. On the right, Alexander Young, aggressive and relentless, drives his cavalry straight into the Theban flank. The sacred band fights to the last man. They do not retreat. They do not break. They are annihilated. The Greek center collapses. When the dust settles, the old world ends quietly. Athens loses the war without being destroyed. Thebes loses its power entirely. Sparta, absent, is irrelevant. Greece does not burn, it submits. Philip does not sack cities. He reorganizes them. He forms the League of Corinth, binding Greek states into a structure they no longer control. Independence survives in name only. Macedonian authority becomes permanent. By every known rule of historical causality, this moment traces directly back to 431 BCE. Because Charoneia is not just a Macedonian victory, it is the final consequence of the Peloponnesian War. The war taught Greece how to destroy itself in pieces, how to prioritize rivalry over survival, how to exhaust strength without building unity. By the time an external power appears, Greece has no reserves left, military, moral, or political. Athens adapts. It always does. Deprived of empire, it becomes something else entirely. A school, a memory, a warning. Its generals fade. Its philosophers endure. Plato writes in the shadow of execution and defeat. Aristotle teaches in a world where the city-state is already obsolete. Sparta fades faster. Its system cannot survive irrelevance. Without constant victory, discipline becomes hollow ritual. Population decline accelerates. Wealth concentrates. Training decays. Sparta becomes a symbol rather than a force. Thebes flashes and vanishes. Macedonia inherits everything. Alexander will carry Greek culture across the known world, but he does so with an army built on the lessons of Greek failure, not Greek unity. His conquests are made possible not by the brilliance of classical Greece, but by its exhaustion. The Peloponnesian War leaves no monuments, it leaves patterns. It proves that wars do not need to be total to be fatal, that victory can hollow out the victor, that endurance without restraint is merely delayed collapse. Athens survived Sparta, plague, famine, and defeat, only to lose the world it once shaped. Thucydides ends his history before the war concludes, not because he ran out of events, but because the pattern was already complete. Fear leads to preemption. Preemption leads to escalation. Escalation destroys restraint. And once restraint is gone, collapse becomes inevitable. The Peloponnesian War is often remembered as a clash of systems: democracy versus oligarchy, sea power versus land power, innovation versus tradition. This is comforting. It suggests lessons can be extracted cleanly. They cannot. The real lesson is harsher. Athens and Sparta were not destroyed by what made them different. They were destroyed by what made them certain. Certain that power could be managed. Certain that rivals could be controlled. Certain that victory could be contained. The war strips away the illusion that intelligence prevents catastrophe. It does not. It only makes catastrophe more elaborate. By the time Greece realizes this, it no longer matters. The world has moved on. The city-state, once the engine of Greek identity, is finished. In its place rise kingdoms, empires, administrators, and standing armies. The age of debate gives way to the age of command. And yet, centuries later, this war is still read, still studied, still argued over, not because it is ancient, but because it is familiar, because the Peloponnesian War does not belong to Greece. It belongs to anyone who believes they can manage fear with power, ambition with logic, and rivalry with restraint. History insists this war is over. Human behavior suggests otherwise. 431 BCE, remembered backward. To understand why the Peloponnesian War still matters, one must strip away the dates, the names, the monuments, and look instead at the mechanism underneath. Because this war does not unfold like a tragedy with a single fatal flaw. It unfolds like a machine, grinding forward step by step, each decision feeding the next, until no one inside it can stop the motion. At the beginning, neither Athens nor Sparta seeks annihilation. That is the lie history often tells. Sparta wants security. Athens wants influence. Both believe they are acting defensively. Both believe escalation can be controlled. Both believe their systems make them rational. By every known rule of human behavior, this belief is fatal. Fear is not static. It grows. It demands reassurance. It interprets caution as weakness and restraint as vulnerability. Sparta fears Athens' expansion. Athens fears Spartan interference. Each move made to reduce fear increases it on the other side. This is the engine of the war. The first invasions of Attica are not meant to destroy Athens. They are meant to intimidate it. The long walls are not meant to provoke Sparta. They are meant to reassure Athenians. The Delian League is not founded as an empire. It becomes one through inertia and convenience. No single decision causes catastrophe. The catastrophe is cumulative. Athens does not fall because it lacks intelligence. It falls because intelligence convinces it that consequences can be calculated indefinitely, that risk can be managed without end. That power, once achieved, can be safely exercised forever. Sparta does not fall because it lacks discipline. It falls because discipline cannot adapt, because obedience works best in isolation, because a society built for permanence cannot function in a world that demands change. The Peloponnesian War exposes a truth Greek culture had never confronted directly. Excellence is not stability. Athens excels at innovation. Sparta excels at control. Both mistake excellence for immunity. The plague shatters this illusion first, not because it is unique, but because it is indiscriminate. It does not respect strategy. It does not reward virtue. It does not punish arrogance selectively. It simply kills, and in doing so, It reveals how thin civilization truly is. Law dissolves within weeks. Religious certainty collapses. Social bonds weaken. The city survives physically, but its internal cohesion never fully recovers. Athens continues the war with fewer limits, fewer taboos, and fewer breaks. From this moment on, escalation accelerates. Cities are no longer punished, they are erased. Melos is not conquered, it is exterminated. Debate gives way to force. Power becomes its own justification. The language of necessity replaces the language of justice. The Sicilian expedition is not an anomaly. It is the logical outcome of a city that no longer recognizes limits. Athens does not sail to Sicily because it is irrational. It sails because it has survived too much, because each disaster overcome reinforces the belief that disaster itself can be mastered, because survival breeds confidence faster than wisdom. Sparta's response mirrors this pattern. It learns, it adapts, it abandons old hesitations, it builds fleets, it accepts Persian gold, it embraces strategies once considered dishonorable. Victory requires flexibility, and Sparta pays the price for it later. By the final phase of the war, neither side resembles what it once was. Athens is still democratic, but harsher. Sparta is still disciplined, but compromised. Both have crossed lines they once claimed defined them. The end comes not with moral clarity, but with exhaustion. Athens surrenders, not because it is evil or weak, but because it has nothing left to trade for survival. Sparta wins, not because it is virtuous, but because it outlasts its rival by a narrow margin. And even then, victory destroys it. The Peloponnesian War teaches Greece how to win wars and lose peace. After 404 BCE, no city knows how to stop fighting. The moral vocabulary that once restrained violence is gone. Alliances become temporary tools. Trust becomes a liability. Each power rise is shorter than the last. The result is not decline through decadence. It is decline through competence. Greek warfare becomes more efficient. Greek brutality becomes normalized. Greek politics become sharper and more cynical. The city-state system evolves beyond its ability to sustain itself. When Macedonia arrives, it does not conquer a golden age. It inherits a wasteland of rivalries. Philip and Alexander do not defeat Greek armies because they are braver or smarter. They defeat them because they face cities that cannot cooperate without suspicion, cannot submit without resentment, and cannot lead without provoking rebellion. The Peloponnesian War breaks the shared assumptions that once made Greek independence possible, that cities will restrain themselves, that allies will remain loyal, that victory will be temporary. Once these assumptions die, nothing replaces them. And yet, the war endures in memory, not because of its destruction, but because of its clarity. Thucydides refuses myth. He refuses divine causation. He refuses hero worship. He presents war as a human process driven by fear, interest, and honor, not ideals but pressures. That is why this war remains modern, because it shows how rational people create irrational outcomes, how systems designed to prevent catastrophe slowly generate it, how survival strategies become long-term disasters. The Peloponnesian War is not a warning against ambition, it is a warning against certainty. Certainty that power can be balanced forever. Certainty that enemies can be managed. Certainty that escalation can be controlled. History insists Athens and Sparta are ancient. Human behavior insists they are not. This war does not end when the walls fall or when the treaties are signed. It ends only when a different political world replaces the one that created it, and even then its pattern survives, waiting. 431 BCE, the march into Attica, reimagined. The first Spartan army advances. Its soldiers march with precision, shields locked, spears upright. Dust rises from their feet, but the wind carries more than dust. It carries inevitability. To an observer outside history, this should be the moment Athens falls. By every known rule of warfare, the city is doomed. Its farmers are abandoned. Its walls are a refuge, not a weapon. Its navy, formidable as it is, cannot protect the countryside. Hunger is already knocking at the gates, and disease is waiting patiently for the overflow. Yet Athens does not surrender. It does not engage in pitched battle. Instead, it retreats behind the long walls. The city becomes a fortress and a trap, containing both the people it seeks to protect and the seeds of its own suffering. For Sparta, this is intolerable. To leave an enemy unpunished is sacrilege, and yet for weeks, months, years, they achieve nothing decisive. Inside the walls, life continues under an almost absurd logic, survival at all costs. Citizens crowd together in narrow streets. Refugees arrive from the burned countryside. Food stores deplete faster than expected. Disease spreads. The plague has not yet arrived, but hunger whispers promises of collapse. Each day is a calculation. Who will survive until night? Who will wake at all? Fear is constant, inescapable, a physical weight pressing on every shoulder. Pericles understands this. He knows Athens cannot win a conventional fight on land. Sparta cannot be outflanked. Hoplite formations cannot be shattered without immense risk. So he chooses patience, he chooses endurance, he chooses strategy over honor. Every known rule of Greek warfare says this is cowardice. Every citizen understands it, feels like surrender. And yet in this pause, Athens begins to accumulate its true advantage. Time. Time is invisible, but it is deadly. Each day Sparta spends ravaging abandoned fields, waiting for Athens to break, is a day the Athenian fleet grows stronger, more experienced, more confident. Ships are repaired, rowers train. The economy, small as it is, finds sustenance in tribute and tribute alone. The city, though racked by fear, begins to adapt to its new reality. Then the plague arrives. It does not announce itself. It is quiet at first, a fever here, a cough there. Then bodies begin to fall. Friends, family, children, soldiers. The sick are abandoned in streets, temples and homes alike. Medical knowledge is helpless. Rituals fail. Religion fails. Panic becomes logic. Those who survive feel the weight of the dying pressing against them like a physical barrier. The city is alive, but it is a city of the living dead. By every rational measure, Athens should collapse. It does not entirely, and this endurance creates the psychological momentum that Sparta cannot crush. Fear, which once threatened to break Athens, now shapes it into something unpredictable. After years of stalemate, tragedy and plague, Athens begins to recover. It wins small victories at sea. Its generals, once cautious, become audacious. Its citizens, hardened by death, refuse to bow. Each partial success inflates morale dangerously, giving the illusion that Sparta can be defeated entirely, that the city can transition from endurance to expansion. This is when the war becomes truly fatal. Athens chooses overreach. The Sicilian expedition is planned not out of necessity but hubris. The empire's navy and army are mobilized on a scale unprecedented. Soldiers and rowers board triremes with the illusion that destiny itself has chosen them. Civic pride and ambition combine to override caution, ignoring the lessons of plague, famine, and near collapse. Alcibiades manipulates the assembly, promising glory and wealth. Nicias, cautious, warns repeatedly. He predicts disaster. By every measure of logic, he is correct. By every measure of human nature, he is ignored. The assembly votes overwhelmingly for war. The largest force Athens has ever mustered sails across the sea to an island it does not fully understand, against an enemy it cannot reliably predict, and disaster arrives as promised. The fleet, initially confident, is plagued by miscommunication, disunity, and betrayal. Supplies run low, disease returns, commanders argue instead of acting. The enemy, aided by Spartan generals and now well informed by Alcibiades' betrayal, exploits every flaw. Trapped in hostile territory, Athens' forces are slowly encircled. Retreat becomes a nightmare. Starvation and constant attack transform the soldiers into a panicked mass. By the river Acinarus, the campaign collapses. Thousands die in combat and famine. Thousands are enslaved. Only fragments ever return to Athens. The city, already weakened, mourns an entire generation of citizens. Its empire, once expanding, has contracted catastrophically. Sparta, now emboldened and aided by Persian gold, tightens its grip on the Athenian heartland. Thessaly is fortified. Slaves flee. Silver mines are lost. The Peloponnesian League consolidates power. Athens, bleeding on multiple fronts, cannot recover strategic initiative easily. And yet, the city survives. It endures. Political factions clash. Democracy falters under oligarchic coups. Leadership is assassinated, exiled, and reinstated. Wars rage across the Aegean. Athens continues, not because it can win, but because survival itself has become instinct. The Peloponnesian War, at this point, is no longer a conventional conflict. It is a test of human endurance, citywide psychology, and the slow, inexorable collapse of civilizations under the weight of ambition, fear, and miscalculation. History measures victory in battles won and walls conquered. Thucydides measures it differently, in human suffering, in fear, in the fragility of political systems. By his account, no city-state should have survived the plague, the defeats, the Sicilian disaster, and internal collapse. Yet Athens endures, temporarily at least, proving that human will and structure can defy reason even as they sow the seeds of eventual destruction. The Peloponnesian War is not over. It has only reached a stage where the consequences of past decisions begin to unfold with terrifying clarity. Every victory, every defeat, every plague, every betrayal compounds. Every rational action has already set in motion outcomes that logic cannot prevent. Athens, Sparta, and all of Greece are now trapped in a chain of events that will culminate decades later in the final unraveling of classical Greek independence. The city that defied logic for decades has unknowingly sealed the fate of the world around it. 411 BCE. Athens. The city teeters on the edge. By now the war has become unrecognizable. It no longer resembles the neat campaigns of early years. The Peloponnesian War is no longer a series of battles. It is a continuous grind, a slow-motion collapse under the weight of ambition, exhaustion, and desperation. Athens survives the Sicilian catastrophe, the plague, famine, and repeated invasions, yet it is weaker than ever, straining to maintain authority over an empire it cannot defend. Inside the city, political unrest reaches a breaking point. Democracy, once the source of Athens' strength, now becomes a liability. Citizens argue endlessly. Debates that once produced strategy now create paralysis. Fear and grief amplify ambition. The assembly is no longer a forum for collective decision-making. It is a battlefield for demagogues, opportunists, and men willing to gamble with the lives of thousands to gain power for themselves. Amidst this chaos, the oligarchic coup of 411 BCE occurs. The 400 seize power with the promise of stability, claiming the city is too weak to remain democratic while at war. They are ruthless, precise, and unyielding. Citizens are executed or exiled. Orders are enforced without debate. It is a moment Athens never thought it would experience, absolute internal tyranny imposed in the name of survival. Yet even tyranny cannot guarantee stability. Revolts flare. Sailors at Samos reject oligarchic authority. The city's fleet, its only true instrument of power, remains loyal to democracy. This creates a paradox. Athens is strong at sea, weak at home. The oligarchs control the streets, but they cannot control the empire. The democracy reasserts itself, and the coup collapses almost as quickly as it began. Athens survives politically, though barely, battered and paranoid. By every known rule of history, this internal collapse should have finished Athens. Yet it endures. Its citizens, hardened by plague, famine and disaster, refuse to surrender. They survive because survival is all that remains. Victory is no longer a goal. Logic has been replaced by instinct. Fear and habit dictate every decision. Abroad, Sparta grows ever more confident. Its occupation of Decelia cuts Athens off from vital resources. The silver mines are inaccessible. Trade routes are blocked. Spartan garrisons enforce discipline across Attica. And yet, even under this pressure, Athens continues to maneuver, repairing fleets, defending remaining allies, and keeping the war alive by sheer stubbornness. Alcibiades returns once more, a figure who has come to define the unpredictability of Greek conflict. Once exiled, now reinstated, he leads Athens to surprising victories, restoring some measure of confidence. The city experiences a brief illusion of resurgence, but history warns that these moments of triumph are often the precursors to catastrophic downfall. Athens begins to believe once again in its invincibility. The contrast is brutal. The city survives catastrophe, yet its successes feed overconfidence. Strategic judgment is replaced by hubris. Every victory is a step deeper into recklessness. By every known rule of warfare, this is unsustainable. Athens has learned to endure, not to dominate. Yet it cannot resist the lure of empire, the temptation of revenge, the pull of glory. Meanwhile, Sparta evolves. The rigid, land-bound culture that once seemed slow and conservative becomes adaptive. They forge alliances with Persia. They rebuild fleets. They innovate in response to Athenian resilience. Lysander emerges as a commander capable not just of winning battles, but of exploiting the strategic weaknesses that Athens has consistently created through overreach. His patience contrasts sharply with Athenian impulsiveness. He waits for moments when Athens will overextend, and those moments inevitably arrive. In 406 BCE, Athens wins the naval battle of Arginisae, a rare triumph. Yet victory is immediately corrupted by internal politics. The generals, accused of failing to recover the dead, are executed. Discipline, morale and strategy are compromised not by the enemy, but by the city itself. Athens becomes a battlefield, even when no external force presses. Its own citizens enforce fear as effectively as Sparta's armies ever could. By 405 BCE, Athens faces its final test at Aegospotami. A Spartan fleet, disciplined and prepared, traps the Athenian ships. Communication breaks down. Rowers are exhausted. Sailors panic. The trap closes. The city's greatest strength, the navy, is destroyed almost entirely. Thousands die. Thousands are enslaved. The empire is gone. The long struggle for survival, for dominance, for prestige, ends in a decisive, catastrophic stroke. The city has survived plague, famine, political collapse, overreach and betrayal. And yet, all of this survival leads only to strategic annihilation. Athens is physically intact, but politically and militarily it is broken. By every known rule of human endurance, this is the moment where a city should collapse entirely. Yet Athens endures, at least temporarily. The people rebuild walls, maintain ships, and cling to life. Survival is instinct, not triumph. The war has changed everything. Fear no longer restrains ambition. Fear no longer restrains ambition. Victory no longer stabilizes politics. Death, famine, and betrayal are normalized. Greece has been transformed from a collection of independent city-states into a fractured, exhausted landscape where temporary triumphs are overshadowed by cumulative catastrophe. And yet, even as Athens suffers, the seeds of future power are being sown. Macedon observes from the north. Its rulers learn from the Greek experience, from the destructive overreach of Athens, from the rigid inflexibility of Sparta, from the consequences of alliances, betrayals, and plagues. They see that power is not destroyed by brilliance alone, but by the inability to adapt over decades. The Peloponnesian War does not end with Athens' surrender. It ends with a transformation of Greece itself, a society conditioned by constant conflict, hardened by fear, and forever fractured by overreach and miscalculation. The stage is set for the next power to rise, waiting for a Greece that has learned all the lessons of the past too late. By every known rule of history, the war should have concluded centuries ago. Instead, its consequences ripple outward, shaping politics, strategy, and human behavior in ways that Athens and Sparta could never have imagined. The conflict becomes a cautionary tale. Survival does not guarantee victory, endurance does not equal triumph, and every success carries the seeds of eventual collapse. The Peloponnesian War continues not in battles or treaties, but in the minds of the survivors, in the systems they reconstruct, and in the generations who inherit a fractured Greek world. Its pattern, fear, overreach, collapse, adaptation, will repeat, echoing across decades and ultimately allowing a new power from the north to conquer what Athens and Sparta could not protect. 406 BCE. The Aegean Sea, after Arginose, the waters of the Aegean are littered with wreckage, a testament to the fleeting nature of victory. Athens has won a tactical triumph at Arginose, destroying a significant portion of the Spartan fleet. Yet the victory comes at a cost so steep, it borders on tragedy. Storms prevent the retrieval of the dead, and political infighting consumes the city almost as swiftly as the enemy might have. By every known rule of rational governance, Athens should have consolidated, honored its dead, and prepared for the inevitable Spartan response. It does not. Inside the city, fury replaces strategy. The assembly demands justice against its own generals, accusing them of negligence. Emotion outweighs judgment. 6 of the most capable leaders are executed. The fleet loses experienced commanders. Discipline frays. Morale plunges. Soldiers at sea watch news of their leaders' deaths and cannot distinguish fear from outrage. Leadership, once a beacon, has become a liability. Meanwhile, Sparta does not falter. Lysander, observing the chaos, plans meticulously. He consolidates alliances, refines tactics, and exploits the mistakes Athens has already made by punishing its own commanders. By every known rule of warfare, this is intelligence applied with patience. Sparta, once considered rigid and predictable, has learned adaptability from decades of war. The city-state that could not innovate now commands precision in timing and strategy that Athens cannot counter. By 405 BCE, the culmination arrives at Agaspotami. The Athenians, desperate for food and supplies, position their fleet along the river, poorly secured. They are fatigued, overconfident, and divided. Spartan forces, under Lysander, approach with calculated patience. Scouts and messengers are ignored. Formation is lax. The river becomes a trap. By every known rule of naval warfare, the Athenians are doomed before the first spear strikes the water. Lysander waits until the tide of overconfidence is at its peak. Then he strikes. Spartan ships cut through Athenian lines with ruthless efficiency. Rowers are slaughtered mid-oar. Ships collide. Men drown in their own armor. Panic spreads like wildfire. Athens' navy, its defining instrument of power, is annihilated almost entirely in a single decisive engagement. What survives is insufficient to sustain the city's empire or defend its coasts. The psychological impact is immediate. Citizens watch the smoke of battle from the city walls. Families learn of deaths in stages, first in rumor, then in mass reports. Fear and despair settle like a plague over the population. The empire's tributaries, sensing weakness, begin to rebel. Athens and allies fracture. Corinth, Chios, Samos all begin to reconsider their loyalty. The fragile threads of influence Athens once wielded dissolve within weeks. By 404 BCE, the inevitable is complete. The city surrenders. The long walls are torn down. The fleet is handed over. Sparta dictates terms of submission. The empire is no more. The democracy which survived plague, famine, and internal coups is temporarily dismantled. Athens is no longer a power, but a shadow of its former self. By every rational measure, the city has been crushed, yet it survives in physical form. Survival, however, is not triumph. It is the residue of endurance. The consequences extend far beyond Athens. Greece itself has been irrevocably transformed. The war has normalized extreme violence. Cities observe that rebellion can be punished brutally, that allies can be coerced or bribed, that famine and plague do not prevent continuation of war. The moral and social norms that once restrained conflict are gone. Each state now knows that temporary victories and enduring resentment can outlast strategic defeat. Sparta, victorious but exhausted, soon faces its own structural limits. Its rigid society, designed to control helots and maintain internal discipline, is ill-suited for empire. Managing allies, enforcing tribute, and maintaining a fleet proves taxing. The war has taught the Greeks that endurance and ingenuity are necessary for survival, but Sparta's system depends on repetition, not innovation. Its supremacy, though real, is fragile. Athens, paradoxically, benefits from its suffering. The city's destruction is incomplete. Scholars, orators, and citizens begin rebuilding. Philosophers record, generals analyze, historians narrate. The trauma becomes cultural memory. Lessons about overreach, miscalculation, and human behavior endure far longer than political dominance ever could. Thucydides completes his history during this period, capturing not only the events but the underlying mechanics: fear, pride, misjudgment, and inevitability. The Peloponnesian War thus leaves a dual legacy. On the surface, it ends with Athenian surrender and Spartan victory, yet beneath, it restructures the Greek world. Alliances are tested continuously, political systems are stressed, military norms are rewritten. The war proves that intelligence, discipline, and endurance do not guarantee safety or victory. Every success carries the seeds of future disaster. The pattern established in this conflict will guide Macedon centuries later. Philip and Alexander will study Greek failures, the overreach of Athens, the rigidity of Sparta, the fracturing of allies. They will exploit the vulnerabilities left by decades of protracted destructive warfare. Macedon rises not because it is stronger than Greece, but because Greece has destroyed the conditions that once allowed city-states to dominate independently. By every measure, the Peloponnesian War is a war of attrition against reason itself. It demonstrates that human behavior, unchecked ambition, fear, and miscalculation can create catastrophes that outlive the individuals who precipitated them. The war begins as a contest of power between two states, but ends as a lesson in the fragility of civilizations. Athens survives physically, but is transformed forever. Sparta survives politically, but is overextended and exhausted. The Greek world survives structurally, but is fractured, leaving it vulnerable to outside forces. And the pattern of human error, pride and endurance continues, proving that survival and wisdom rarely coincide. The Peloponnesian War concludes not with a single battle, but with decades of consequences, shaping strategy, politics, and human behavior in ways that reach far beyond the Greek world. It leaves a haunting question: if survival requires endurance and adaptation, how often do human societies mistake persistence for victory and patience for wisdom? 404 BCE, Athens, the city under siege, and the aftermath begins. The gates of Athens open not to conquerors, but to negotiators. Lysander enters the city with precision and patience, not a torch or sword. The city has survived famine, plague, and political collapse, but now it must submit to terms that erase its empire and humiliate its pride. By every known rule of power, surrender is absolute here. The long walls, symbols of the city's defiance and endurance, are dismantled. Ships, once the lifeblood of Athenian dominance, are surrendered. The empire that reached across the Aegean evaporates almost overnight. Within the city, citizens confront a new reality. Survival has become the only metric. Death, starvation, and plague are familiar, but political submission is unfamiliar and more unsettling. Athenian democracy, once revered, is abolished. In its place, Sparta installs the 30 tyrants, a coalition of oligarchs designed to enforce obedience. Their rule is precise, brutal, and efficient. Every perceived dissenter is punished. Fear becomes governance. Streets, temples, and markets are monitored, and every whisper carries risk. By every rational measure, Athens should collapse entirely, yet it survives physically, even as its soul is under siege. The 30 rule briefly. With a merciless hand, property is seized. Political rivals vanish, executed or exiled. Families are torn apart. Citizens watch friends die without trial, unable to intervene. Survival becomes a daily calculation. Obey, flee, or die. The oligarchs are careful, knowing that absolute control requires neither mercy nor delay. They are the city's final plague, and yet Athens endures. Internal opposition forms, quietly at first, then with increasing boldness. The exiled rally, the surviving generals organize, and the citizens, hardened by years of hardship, resist silently. Fear, once the tool of the tyrants, becomes the fuel of revolution. The 30 cannot maintain control indefinitely. By 403 BCE, democracy is restored. Survival once again is the guiding principle. Athens learns that endurance itself is power, even when systems of governance are fractured. Meanwhile, the Greek world watches. Sparta, victorious in war, is now confronted by its own limitations. Its rigid social structure cannot adapt to the needs of empire. Maintaining garrisons, ensuring loyalty, and enforcing tribute strains the population and economy. The rigid discipline that once made Sparta formidable now becomes brittle. Allies chafe, discontent spreads, and the seeds of future conflict are sown. Athens, though humbled, begins to recover strategically. Its walls are rebuilt. Its fleet returns, limited but functional. Its economy, disrupted but resilient, revives. Leadership adapts. Citizens who survived plague and famine now navigate political complexity with new caution. The city becomes disciplined, not by fear alone, but by the memory of suffering, by every known rule of historical behavior. Athens' recovery should be partial, tentative, and hesitant, yet it survives, demonstrating that resilience can outlast both victory and defeat. The Peloponnesian War in this phase is no longer just military. It is psychological, structural, and cultural. The war has rewritten the norms of governance, alliance, and human behavior. Cities observe that survival is a strategic tool, that fear can enforce compliance, and that internal politics can be as deadly as external enemies. Greece has been reshaped. Alliances are fragile, loyalty is conditional, and the moral economy that once restrained violence has been shattered. Sparta's triumph, though real, is temporary. The effort to maintain supremacy exposes structural weaknesses. Its population is small and declining. Its economic system cannot support prolonged campaigns. Its rigid culture discourages innovation. These limitations, invisible during initial victories, become fatal over time. The city that once seemed unassailable is now vulnerable to internal revolt and external manipulation. Athens, paradoxically, benefits from its suffering. Its trauma transforms into strategy, philosophy, and historical insight. Survivors write histories. Generals reflect on failures. Citizens internalize lessons about overreach, hubris, and resilience. Thucydides, recording these events, captures not only military outcomes, but the mechanisms of fear, ambition, and inevitability that drive them. The war becomes a laboratory for human behavior under extreme conditions. Beyond Athens and Sparta, the Peloponnesian War sets the stage for the next phase of Greek history. Macedonia, observing from the north, takes note. Philip and Alexander will inherit a landscape fractured by decades of destructive conflict. They will understand that victory in Greece does not require defeating brilliant generals, it requires exploiting systemic weakness, division, and exhaustion. The patterns of the Peloponnesian War, the cycle of ambition, overreach, collapse, and adaptation, become the blueprint for conquest. By every rational rule, Greece should have emerged from the Peloponnesian War exhausted, fractured, and incapable of further significance. And yet, even in devastation, the seeds of cultural and intellectual endurance survive. Athens' philosophers, historians, and strategists preserve lessons that extend far beyond the battlefield. Military innovation, political theory, and strategic reflection emerge from the rubble. Athens' survival is paradoxical. The city is weaker materially, but stronger intellectually, its endurance ensuring that its influence will outlast its empire. The Peloponnesian War concludes this chapter with a haunting clarity. Survival is not synonymous with triumph, endurance is not equivalent to wisdom, and even decisive victories may mask deeper structural decay. Fear, misjudgment, and ambition create outcomes that outlast the intentions of their architects. Cities survive physically, yet are transformed psychologically, politically, and culturally. Athens and Sparta, once the twin engines of Greek power, emerge battered, disoriented, and fundamentally changed. The Greek world, exhausted and divided, becomes prey for external powers. Macedonia's rise is inevitable, not because it is stronger, but because Greece has already exhausted the capacities that once made it invincible. The Peloponnesian War ends in 404 BCE in the physical sense, but its consequences echo across decades, centuries, and civilizations. It leaves a landscape where survival depends on endurance, where victory is fleeting, and where logic, ambition, and fear intertwine to produce outcomes no strategist could fully anticipate. 403 BCE. Athens, restored democracy, fragile peace. The city breathes cautiously. The 30 tyrants are gone. Democracy returns, but the shadow of fear lingers. By every rational measure, Athens should have recovered fully after the oligarchic coup is overthrown. Yet trauma lingers, shaping every decision, every law, every debate. Citizens walk the streets with a new awareness. Survival is fragile, loyalty is conditional, and death may come from within as easily as from without. The Peloponnesian War has done more than destroy armies, it has reshaped the psychology of the city. Each household remembers plague, famine, betrayal, and execution. Generals who survived campaigns must now navigate a city that distrusts them almost as much as it fears the enemy. Political factions compete not over ideology, but over survival and reputation. Athens, a city that once believed in reasoned debate, now governs cautiously, constantly aware that a single miscalculation could reopen the wounds of tyranny. At sea, Athens rebuilds its fleet, but the empire is gone. The distant allies, once loyal under tribute and persuasion, are independent or in rebellion. The long walls remain, but they now symbolize endurance rather than dominance. Pericles is gone, and with him the vision that once guided the city. Leadership is fragmented, experimental, and cautious. Every strategic decision carries the weight of recent memory. Mistakes cannot be afforded. Sparta, though victorious, is not unchallenged. The occupation of Attica and the control of Greek cities stretch its limited resources. Its rigid social system, built for internal stability, now faces the unpredictability of empire. By every known rule of governance, Sparta should consolidate power effortlessly after Athens' defeat. Yet it cannot. Allies chafe. Helots remain a constant threat. Strategic overreach is inevitable because the system was never designed to adapt. Sparta survives, but only barely. Its victory is incomplete, and its dominance is temporary. The Greek world, exhausted and fractured, becomes a theater of constant maneuvering. Alliances shift, rebellions ignite, and the memory of the Peloponnesian War haunts every negotiation. Cities that survived by endurance now operate under the assumption that no power is permanent and that betrayal is always possible. Fear has replaced trust. Past mistakes guide future caution, yet overconfidence still tempts leaders. The war has trained Greece to survive disasters, but not to prevent them. Athens paradoxically benefits intellectually from its suffering. Historians write, philosophers teach, generals record tactics. Thucydides' account, completed during this period, captures the mechanics of fear, ambition, and inevitability with unprecedented clarity. Strategy is no longer measured by individual battles alone, but by the cumulative impact of decisions over decades. Knowledge becomes a weapon that outlives armies, preserving the lessons of catastrophe. Meanwhile, Macedonia observes silently. Philip, and later Alexander, study not just Greek armies but Greek failures. They witness the consequences of overreach, factionalism, and internal collapse. They understand that an empire does not fall solely to brilliant generals or overwhelming force, but to a fractured system incapable of coordinating under stress. The Macedonian rise is shaped directly by the patterns established in the Peloponnesian War. Athens, though physically weakened, demonstrates a remarkable capacity for recovery. Its walls are rebuilt, its fleets are restored, its political system, though tested repeatedly, survives. Survival becomes a principle stronger than ideology or ambition. Citizens who have endured plague, famine, and political terror become pragmatic, adaptive, and cautious. Yet even as the city survives, it is marked by trauma. Generations grow up learning fear, loss, and the price of misjudgment. The Peloponnesian War, in essence, becomes a study in human behavior under extreme stress. It illustrates that survival can coexist with catastrophic strategic failure. Athens' endurance is impressive, but its empire is gone, its population diminished, and its political system forever altered. Sparta's temporary dominance demonstrates that even victory can be a burden when systems are inflexible and resources limited. The Greek world, reshaped by decades of conflict, is no longer capable of sustaining independent city-state supremacy. By every known rule of history, this should be the end of classical Greek influence. The city-states have been weakened to a point where no single state can dominate independently. Yet Athens survives, not through power, but through resilience. Sparta survives, not through adaptability, but through strict control. And the Greek world, fractured and exhausted, becomes a stage for new powers to rise, waiting for a state capable of exploiting the weaknesses left by years of war. The pattern is clear. Fear drives preemption. Preemption escalates conflict. Escalation erodes restraint, and restraint eroded produces collapse. This pattern will be observed, studied, and exploited by powers beyond Greece. Survival does not equal triumph. Endurance does not equal mastery. Knowledge does not prevent catastrophe, but it ensures the lessons endure. The Peloponnesian War, though concluded in 404 BCE, has consequences that will ripple for decades. Its logic, cumulative misjudgment, human frailty, and the inevitability of escalation shapes every decision in the Greek world. Even in victory and survival, Athens and Sparta have learned that the cost of power may outweigh its benefits. Civilization is fragile. Ambition is deadly, and history insists that no empire lasts forever when its foundation is fear, pride, and division. 399 BCE. Athens, the shadow of war lingers. By now, Athens has endured nearly 3 decades of conflict, famine, plague, political upheaval, and foreign intervention. The Peloponnesian War may have ended 5 years earlier, but its consequences are alive in every street, every assembly, every decision. The city is physically intact, yet the psychological and political landscape is fractured beyond easy repair. Citizens remember the horrors, the plague that killed tens of thousands, the collapse of military campaigns, the executions of leaders, and the tyranny of the 30. Fear, loss, and vigilance have become permanent conditions. The trial of Socrates in 399 BCE epitomizes the enduring trauma. The philosopher, accused of corrupting youth and disrespecting the gods, faces death at the hands of the very city he has guided intellectually for decades. The charges are legal, but the underlying forces are psychological. Athens, weakened by war and internal strife, seeks scapegoats to explain its misfortunes. Fear of rebellion, mistrust of intellectual independence, and unresolved anger over decades of mismanagement converge. By every known measure, this is a city still living in the shadow of conflict, where survival has hardened citizens into suspicious and reactive participants in governance. Athens' population has shrunk, its economy is fragile, and its naval power is limited. Yet the city endures through adaptation. Citizens innovate, trade cautiously, and rebuild social structures that were nearly destroyed by decades of warfare. Philosophers, playwrights, and historians document what they see, ensuring that the lessons of fear, overreach, and human frailty are preserved. This intellectual endurance born from trauma becomes Athens' unexpected strength, a form of survival more lasting than any fleet or army. Sparta, triumphant in 404 BCE, faces a more subtle crisis. Its rigid social hierarchy, designed to maintain order in peacetime, struggles to adapt to the demands of empire and control over conquered allies. Helots, the subjugated population critical to Spartan economic stability, remain restless. The death toll from the war, combined with decades of isolation and population decline, has left Sparta vulnerable. By 399 BCE, it is clear that the city-state cannot sustain long-term dominance. Victory has become a burden. The system that delivered triumph now strains under its own weight. Across the Greek world, smaller city-states take note. Alliances are fragile, loyalty is conditional, and the risk of rebellion looms constantly. The Peloponnesian War has demonstrated that prolonged conflict erodes trust, destabilizes governance, and creates unpredictable outcomes. Cities that survived the war do so through constant vigilance, cautious diplomacy, and strategic compromise. Human behavior, shaped by decades of fear and deprivation, now dictates policy more than ideology or law. In Athens, the memory of overreach shapes military planning. Leaders understand that strategic mistakes carry catastrophic consequences. Yet the desire for influence and prestige remains. The paradox of Athens' survival is stark. The city endures through prudence, but prudence alone cannot restore the empire it once controlled. Every decision is measured against the lessons of Sicilian disaster, the collapse of the Long Walls, and the political turmoil of 411 BCE. Fear is both protective and paralyzing. Sparta, meanwhile, learns from its own overextension. Its rigid control, while effective during the war, proves unsustainable in peace. The Peloponnesian League begins to fracture. Allies chafe under tribute and interference. Internal dissent grows. By 399 BCE, the city-state's power is significant but precarious. The war has given Sparta victory, but the structures that produced that victory are ill-equipped for governance beyond immediate conquest. The Peloponnesian War, in its aftermath, reshapes strategic thinking in Greece. Military commanders, political leaders, and philosophers study the conflict not as a series of victories and defeats, but as a sequence of human errors amplified by fear, pride, and misjudgment. Athens' endurance demonstrates that survival is possible even after near-total collapse, but survival is not equivalent to triumph. The Greek world, exhausted and fractured, becomes a landscape where patterns of failure repeat, awaiting a new power to exploit them. Macedon, observing from the north, notes these vulnerabilities with precision. Philip studies Greek successes and failures, learning that power is not achieved solely through brilliance, but by exploiting systemic weakness. By 399 BCE, the foundations of Macedonian conquest are being laid, informed directly by the patterns established during the Peloponnesian War. Athens and Sparta, exhausted by decades of conflict, cannot prevent the rise of an external power that understands the lessons of their overreach. By every known rule of history, Athens and Sparta should have been destroyed entirely. Instead, they survive in fractured, transformed forms. The Peloponnesian War teaches a harsh truth. Endurance may preserve life, but it cannot prevent systemic collapse. Cities survive, yet empires vanish. Fear, ambition, and misjudgment shape outcomes as effectively as strategy and strength. Even decades later, the war's lessons remain vivid. Survival and wisdom rarely coincide. Power can be fragile. Victory can be temporary. Fear is a more reliable driver of human behavior than reason. Athens and Sparta, once dominant, have been reshaped not just by loss and victory, but by the cumulative consequences of 30 years of relentless conflict. The pattern is undeniable. Escalation leads to collapse. Survival requires adaptation, and endurance often masks vulnerability. By 399 BCE, the Peloponnesian War is over in the literal sense, but its echoes govern Greek politics, philosophy, and military thought for generations. Civilization itself is tested, revealing the fragility of human ambition when fear, pride, and overreach dictate action. The war has ended, yet its lessons endure. Every city-state, every leader, and every citizen who survived is shaped by what they witnessed and suffered. The cycle of conflict, resilience, and eventual transformation has proven to be a constant in human history. 338 BCE, Macedonia rises. The shadow of Peloponnesian still lingers. Decades after the Peloponnesian War, the Greek world has not healed. Athens survives as a city, Sparta survives as a state, but both are weakened, fractured, and exhausted. Political systems remain fragile. Alliances are tentative. Trust is scarce. Human behavior, shaped by decades of fear, famine, plague, and betrayal, continues to dictate decisions more than reason or principle. The war's lessons remain alive, unspoken yet tangible, influencing every alliance, negotiation, and military campaign. By 338 BCE, Philip II of Macedon has consolidated power in the north. He has studied the failures of Athens and Sparta with methodical precision. He observes the fractures, Athens' fear of overextension, Sparta's rigidity, the conditional loyalty of allies, and the psychological scars left by decades of relentless conflict. Unlike previous Greek leaders, Philip understands that domination does not require pure military brilliance alone. It requires exploiting systemic weakness, leveraging fear, and exploiting political division. The patterns established by the Peloponnesian War guide every Macedonian decision. Athens, though recovering intellectually and culturally, is militarily cautious. The city remembers the Sicilian catastrophe, the destruction at Aegospotami, and the fragile survival of its own democracy under internal and external pressures. Its fleet is rebuilt, but it cannot project power like before. Its alliances are weak, and its citizens, while resilient, are wary. By every rational measure, Athens lacks the strength to challenge a cohesive and adaptive power like Macedon. Yet its history, filled with survival against overwhelming odds, gives its leaders a confidence rooted in endurance, if not in superiority. Sparta, meanwhile, continues its decline in subtle increments. Its society, once disciplined and feared, cannot adapt to the scale of Macedonian strategy. The rigid structure that ensured survival during decades of Peloponnesian conflict now constrains innovation. Helots remain a latent threat. Economic limitations prevent sustained campaigns beyond the Peloponnesus. Sparta's victories in the war, once decisive, now appear fleeting in the context of Macedonian ambition. By 338 BCE, Sparta is militarily capable but strategically constrained, a relic of past dominance facing an adaptive external threat. The decisive moment arrives at the Battle of Chaeronea. Philip's forces, disciplined, coordinated, and strategically innovative, confront the combined armies of Athens and Thebes. Numbers are close, but the Macedonian phalanx, reinforced by cavalry under Alexander, executes maneuvers that Greek city-states cannot counter effectively. The Athenians fight with courage, and the Thebans resist fiercely, but cohesion and coordination, eroded by decades of distrust and internal conflict, falter under disciplined pressure. By every known rule of warfare, this battle should favor Athens and Thebes due to their combined experience. Yet human error, fear, and disjointed command dictate otherwise. The battlefield becomes a crucible. Soldiers die en masse. Generals are cut off from communication, and panic spreads unevenly. Individual bravery cannot compensate for systemic dysfunction. Athens and Thebes formations collapse sequentially, first locally, then completely. Macedonia achieves decisive victory, demonstrating that adaptation, cohesion, and exploitation of historical weaknesses outweigh the raw courage and experience of traditional city-state forces. The aftermath is sobering. Athens survives as a city, but its political autonomy is limited. Sparta observes from the Peloponnesus, weakened further, unable to act decisively. The Greek world, exhausted by generations of conflict, cannot resist Macedonian dominance. Philip and soon Alexander impose a new order, not by sheer annihilation, but by exploiting the vulnerabilities created by the Peloponnesian War. History insists that this outcome is inevitable once systemic fragility combines with a disciplined, adaptive adversary. The Peloponnesian War's legacy is clear in this moment. Athens and Sparta, hardened by survival, are nonetheless unable to withstand a coordinated strategic opponent. The patterns of fear, overreach, internal conflict, and cumulative trauma established during decades of war have left Greek city-states vulnerable. Macedon's rise is not just a story of conquest, it is a story of opportunity, exploited in a landscape left fractured by human miscalculation. By 338 BCE, the lessons are manifest. Endurance allows survival, but survival alone cannot prevent decline. Military innovation must be paired with systemic resilience. Political cohesion must withstand fear and ambition simultaneously. History insists that civilizations, no matter how brilliant or courageous, are fragile when human error, pride, and misjudgment accumulate over time. Athens continues to exist, but its influence is curtailed. Sparta continues to exist, but its rigidity ensures gradual decline. Macedonia ascends, exploiting every vulnerability left in the wake of the Peloponnesian War. The Greek world has learned, through nearly a century of conflict, that endurance and survival are not equivalent to dominance. The war's shadow remains long, guiding behavior, shaping alliances, and dictating the rhythm of history. The Peloponnesian War, once a contest between Athens and Sparta, now manifests in the broader theater of Greek civilization. The war's human cost, psychological imprint, and systemic consequences have defined the strategic environment for generations. It has proven that civilizations can survive cataclysm, yet still be consumed by their own structural weaknesses. Survival is achieved, but mastery is not. Victory may be temporary, and endurance may mask vulnerability. By 338 BCE, the Greek world stands on the threshold of transformation. Macedonia will unite it by force, intelligence, and exploitation of historical lessons. Athens and Sparta endure, but the patterns of fear, overreach, and human error, first evident in the Peloponnesian War, determine the outcomes. The past dictates the present. History insists that even the strongest city-states are vulnerable when endurance is tested against systemic fragility, coordinated strategy, and relentless adaptation. 336 BCE. The Greek world poised for transformation, the final consequences of the Peloponnesian War reveal themselves. By 336 BCE, nearly a century has passed since the Peloponnesian War began. The landscape of Greece is unrecognizable from the city-states of 431 BCE. Athens survives, Sparta survives, but both are shadows of their former selves. The lessons of survival, endurance, and overreach are no longer abstract. They are tangible, etched into the minds of leaders, soldiers, and citizens alike. Fear, mistrust, and trauma govern political and military decisions more than ideology or ambition. Every decision is haunted by the ghosts of the past. Athens, intellectually vibrant, is militarily cautious. Its fleets remain, but their power is symbolic, not absolute. The city has learned through decades of disaster that ambition without restraint is fatal. Its leaders weigh every expedition, every alliance, every political maneuver against the accumulated memory of Sicilian disaster, Aegospotami, and decades of internal strife. Survival is paramount, and yet it is a fragile triumph. One misstep could undo all that endurance has preserved. Citizens navigate this delicate balance with vigilance, aware that even small errors can echo catastrophically across the political and military spectrum. Sparta, too, has been transformed. Its rigid social structure, designed to enforce dominance, now limits its flexibility. Though it once commanded fear across the Peloponnesus, decades of attrition, demographic decline, and internal unrest have weakened its capacity to project power. Helots remain a constant latent threat, and the city's economy struggles to sustain its traditional military system. The rigid discipline that once ensured survival now constrains innovation, leaving Sparta exposed to adaptive adversaries. Its supremacy, while intact in reputation, is brittle in practice. Macedon, under Philip II and later Alexander, exploits these vulnerabilities with methodical precision. The rise of Macedon is not simply a story of conquest. It is a story of historical awareness, adaptation, and exploitation of the fractures left by previous generations of Greek conflict. Philip studies the failures of Athens and Sparta, the overreach, internal division, and cumulative consequences of decades of war, and designs strategies to capitalize on them. By every known rule of history, Macedon's rise is both inevitable and perfectly timed, facilitated by the exhaustion and systemic fragility of its neighbors. The Greek world, battered and divided, becomes a laboratory of human behavior under stress. Fear, overreach, and miscalculation are not anomalies, they are constants. Alliances remain conditional, citizens distrust leaders, leaders distrust citizens. Military victories are fleeting, often counterbalanced by political or economic collapse. Endurance has become the measure of survival, yet it is insufficient to secure dominance. The Peloponnesian War demonstrated that survival is distinct from victory, endurance distinct from mastery, and tactical brilliance often rendered meaningless by systemic weakness and human error. Athens' intellectual and cultural resilience becomes its defining legacy. Philosophers, historians, and strategists document the chaos, the suffering, and the errors of the past century. Thucydides' account remains the ultimate testament to human behavior in extreme conditions: ambition, fear, hubris, and misjudgment preserved for posterity. The lessons of the Peloponnesian War endure far beyond the city's walls, shaping strategy, politics, and human understanding for generations. Survival becomes more than a physical reality. It becomes a repository of knowledge, caution, and reflection. Sparta, meanwhile, cannot convert its historical victories into lasting power. Its society, structured for immediate dominance and internal control, cannot adapt to the complexities of a changing geopolitical landscape. Macedon's rise exposes this rigidity. Even as Spartan soldiers maintain their fearsome reputation, their strategic inflexibility ensures that they cannot regain full influence. History insists that endurance alone cannot secure relevance in a world shaped by cumulative miscalculation and adaptive adversaries. The Peloponnesian War's long shadow is evident in the very fabric of Greek civilization. Political systems remain cautious, alliances fragile, and military campaigns measured by lessons learned over decades. The cost of overreach is encoded into every decision. Fear, once a consequence of disaster, becomes a guiding principle. Human behavior, shaped by repeated trauma, ensures that survival is prioritized above ambition or glory. By 336 BCE, the Greek world stands on the cusp of a new era. Macedon will unite it, exploiting the vulnerabilities left by decades of conflict. Athens and Sparta survive, yet their influence is curtailed. Their endurance, while remarkable, cannot restore the dominance they once enjoyed. Civilization has been tested, revealing both the resilience and fragility of human societies. The Peloponnesian War, though over in military terms, continues to dictate the rhythm of politics, strategy, and human behavior. The ultimate lesson is stark. Survival is not synonymous with victory, endurance does not ensure mastery, and even the strongest states are vulnerable when cumulative fear, overreach, and misjudgment dominate decision-making. Athens and Sparta endure physically, but the war has left indelible scars, psychological, structural, and cultural. The Greek world is forever transformed, its cities survive as in a landscape reshaped by decades of relentless conflict. The Peloponnesian War stands as a timeless testament to the fragility of civilizations, the unpredictability of human behavior, and the enduring consequences of fear and ambition. History insists that no empire lasts forever when endurance is tested against structural weakness, internal division, and adaptive adversaries. Athens and Sparta survive, but the Greek world will never be the same. The story concludes here, not with the fall of cities, but with the permanent transformation of a civilization. Survival, endurance, and human resilience define the legacy of the Peloponnesian War, shaping not just the fate of Athens and Sparta, but the trajectory of the entire Hellenic world. The end